Hello everyone, Shirley here. And yesterday we got tons of new exciting information on Midnight, so I thought I would go through the Warrior patch notes, or at least for ARMS today, otherwise this video is probably going to be super long, and looking at some of the new talent tree changes, and just kind of give my feedback and thoughts on these things, and, you know, just read through them for everybody today in case you missed out on some of the information. So jumping right into it here, we've got the Warrior patch notes pulled up. And we're just going to start from the top. Colossus. Demolish now makes the warrior immune to movement forces during the channel. This is a fantastic change because I would assume this means that any sort of focused pushback is now immune, not just knocks themselves. So for example, the first boss in the new Eco Dome dungeon does that pull in constantly. And if you cast Demolish during the pull in, you'll still get pulled in during that. So I would assume this makes you immune to that. Great change. ARMS, Practice Strikes now affects Slam. I believe this is the passive talent for Colossus that just buffs Mortal Strike and Cleave. So now it's just going to buff Slam as well. That's nice. Protection, one against many, no longer affects Whirlwind. That's a bit of a nerf. Mountain Thane, Thunder Blast, damage increased by 100%. This is huge. Really nice buff for Mountain Thane, for Slayer and Prop both, I would imagine. Slayer, Opportunist effects now stacks up to 2 times. Really like this. Nice quality of life buff. It's just like what they did with Sudden Death a couple last patch or 2 patches ago, where you're no longer forced or, you know, heavily incentivized to burn off that Opportunist buff, just instantly hitting overpower every time it procs, if it stacks twice now. So you might have situations where in, you know, execute phase you would be getting your 2 stacks and then Mortal Striking and then Opportunist procs, but maybe you don't want to use it right then. So just a nice little quality of life thing. Glad to see it. Overwhelming Blades, Overwhelm debuff now stacks 5 times, was 10. This is good. I mean, it's literally a nerf, but it's also a buff. I guess to explain, it's a good thing if it's balanced accordingly, otherwise, you know, you're just losing 5% damage, but it's also a buff because if you are ever in a rare situation where this debuff falls off the target, it's now going to take half the time to restack it back up, or, you know, you're in a dungeon and you're pulling constantly, you're going to get those 5 stacks much quicker, so decent change overall. Unrelenting Onslaught now applies 1 stack of Overwhelm, was 2 per stack of Mark for Execution consumed. This is just to offset the fact that it only stacks 5 times now, I would imagine. Having the Sudden Deaths, you know, stack that debuff. Or maybe it's the Slayer Strike that procs that. I don't remember exactly which one it does. Slayer's Malice now affects Execute in addition to Overpower and Raging Blow, but the damage increase is reduced to 20%. So I'd say that's a net overall buff, even though it's, you know, a bit of a nerf to Overpower, but affecting Execute on top of that, that's a great change, since Slayer is really leaning into Execute, so that's decent for me. Class design. Developer's notes. Since Dragonflight, all 3 warrior specs have been overloaded with cooldowns, most of which come from the class tree. I can agree with that. There's a lot of button bloat. The warrior class tree is also focused far more on damage dealing and survival than offering interesting choices and new utility warriors can bring to groups. Yeah, we've been needing utility for a long time. We're taking a fresh look at the warrior class tree in Midnight and looking to make the tree more interesting with more unique effects that warriors can bring to content. New talent, Resonant Voice. The duration of your shouts is increased by 20%. I would assume this is going to affect all of our utility shouts and not just battle shout, because that wouldn't matter. So stuff like Rallying Cry, Intimidating Shout, Piercing Howl, Berserker Shout, I would assume all that. So decent buff, you know, especially for Rally, it needs that. New talent, Blood and Thunder, which, okay, we've had that. Thunderclap affects 5 nearby targets with Rend, causing them to bleed. I'm not sure why that's listed as a new talent, because we have that. I've got the old tree pulled up right here. Where is it at? Crackling Thunder. Or, oh, okay, never mind. I'm thinking of the one, okay, I'm just rambling here. It's here somewhere. The one that makes Thunderclap apply a Rend. New talent, Death Strikes. Mastery increased by 1 to 2%, and auto attack damage increased by 50 and 100%. So that seems like an auto pick for Fury. For the auto attack damage alone, that's a huge bonus. Maybe even with arms you would take that, since we're getting the haste talent that makes you auto-attack faster too. So it remains to be seen. New talent, Retaliation, is back, except it's not a cooldown anymore like it was in Classic. When you take any damage from an enemy within melee range, you have a chance to strike back for physical damage. Depending on where this is at, could be cool. Really good for prot, you're just passively generating some threat off of that. I don't know if Fury or Arms are going to take that. New talent, Battlefield Commander. Your shout effects have additional effects. So this looks like they ripped this straight from the PvP talent. I wonder if that's going to change or still, be there. But it just gives all these passive buffs. So Battle Shout grants you an additional 3% attack power. That's huge. Rallying Cry grants 5% leech and movement speed to allies. Interestingly, it doesn't break roots like it did for the PvP version, but still, a little movement speed on that's nice, and the leech. Piercing Howl, radius increased by 100%, that's pretty big. Berserker Shout, radius increased by 8 yards. Intimidating Shout, cooldown reduced by 15 seconds. That's pretty much the same in that regard there. Since this is in the class tree, this is just going to be an auto pick. I don't see a world where you don't take it for that alone. So, hopefully that's not too annoying to get to. New talent, Anger Management. Every 20 rage you spend reduces the remaining cooldown on Colossus Smash, Wreck, or Avatar by 1 second. So this was already in the arms tree previously, and it just looks like it's moved over to the class tree so everybody can get access to it all the time. Pretty good. You're probably going to take this all the time for Colossus Smash for arms, for example. New talent, Last Stand. When your health is brought below 20%, you marshal your inner strength to increase your max health by 30% for 15 seconds, and instantly heal yourself for that amount. This effect may only occur every 4 minutes. That's insane. I love this. It's passive. It's not even a cooldown like it was for Prot. Obviously, Protection Warriors are going to take this, but for Arms and Fury both, as long as this is, easily gettable without, sacrificing too much DPS or something, you would probably want this all the time. Raiding, Mythic Plus, PvP, this is just really good. A nice passive cheat death almost. New Arms and Fury talent, Interpose. Run at high speed toward a target location near your allies, taking 30% of all damage dealt to allies within 3 yards for 8 seconds, or until you take at least 20% of your max health in damage from this effect. So I believe this one, looking at the new tree here, it's a shared node with Intervene. So for PvP, I don't know that you would take this, or if you're playing Protection, Prot Warrior still might want Intervene, but Interpose is interesting that it reads as its target location near your allies. So the absorption on it, or the DR, isn't very big. But if this is a location, you could potentially just use this as another gap closer, like Heroic Leap or Charge. If it's point targeted, maybe it requires you have to be near allies, I'm not sure. I haven't seen any footage of it yet, and I'm not in the alpha. But it could be good to take, for all content, just for the mobility. We'll have to wait and see on that. New Arms and Fury talent, Rend. So Rend has now moved to the class tree. This is interesting. Lash out with your weapon, striking all targets within 8 yards for physical damage and wounding for an additional bleed over 15 seconds. This is cool. Hopefully it makes Rend feel much more impactful to press. This sounds like they're importing like Diablo's Rend version, where you just kind of whirlwind around you and hit everybody with a big bloody cleave that applies this bleed. So hopefully the actual initial hit is significant enough that it doesn't feel like a nothing, burger to press the button. But it's being in the class tree, so Fury can grab it now too. That's pretty cool. Honed Reflexes now reduces cooldowns by 10% instead of 5. This is a good buff. I hardly ever took this talent. I only usually grabbed it for pathing. Reduces the cooldown of like Pummel and Spell Reflect and stuff. Hopefully this will make it a little bit more significant, like 2 seconds instead of 1. Piercing Howl now also spurs all allies within 12 yards, increasing their movement speed by 30% for 4 seconds. This is fantastic. Finally, we get some utility. I don't know how useful it will be for 5-mans for Mythic Plus, but in Raid, this is all allies, it's not party members, so in raid content, we've got another speed increase, like Stampeding Roar or Windrush Totem, so that's pretty good. Menace no longer causes Intimidating Shout to knock back enemies. So I believe they switched the way that Intimidating Shout works by default. It now causes the targets to just stand in place instead of run away. So I think they just flipped those. Barbaric Training now increases damage dealt by 20% and critical damage by 10% for Slam, Whirlwind, and Thunderclap for Arms and Fury, and Revenge for Protection. That's pretty cool. So that's just one of our passive pickup nodes, but it's also affecting Thunderclap now. So that's pretty nice. Maybe Thunderclap will be a bit more prominent in our rotation even. But if Rend is still its own button, who knows? Champion Spear now pulls affected targets towards the spear until they are within 8 yards of it. The first time an enemy runs away from the spear while chained, they will be pulled towards the spear again. So this is kind of a nerf to spear, and kind of a buff in a way. So within 8 yards, if you throw the spear, it's going to instantly yank everything to the middle of it. So it's kind of a buff in a way. But then they only get one pull-in when mobs are running out of it. So you only get 2 grips off of it. It won't just infinitely pull people back to the middle of the spear. It's decent change, I guess. I don't really have an opinion on this one. Spear is used so little at the moment, but being that it's in the clash tree and we've lost some other things, maybe we'll take this a lot more just for the utility of the root. Intimidating Shout now causes all in range to cower in fear. Menace causes all enemies other than your target to flee. Target cap removed from all versions. That's pretty cool. Big gripe that a lot of people have had for a long time with Intimidating Shout is that it makes everything run away. So it doesn't do that. And the target cap being removed is pretty big. So this is some nice utility, especially in Mythic Plus. If you pull really big and need to like stop, somebody body pulled something, you could just fear the entire group now. So I like that. Shattering Throw and a Wrecking Throw range reduced to 25 yards was 30. Okay. I don't think anybody really cares about that. It's kind of a weird choice. Why they would bother changing that. Thunderclap damage increased by 100%. I like that. Thunderclap's always fun to press. Crushing Force is now a 1-point talent. They just consolidated a couple of points there. Talent tree layout has been updated and many talents have changed positions. Oh boy, have they. The following talents have been removed. Avatar. Move to Fury and Protection trees. So Arms no longer has access to Avatar. I'm not going to lie, I'm pretty sad about that. I like having a big cooldown that makes you big, and it breaks roots. So we're also losing the utility of root breaks. I realize a lot of raiders and stuff probably wouldn't use it for that, but it has its uses, and especially in PvP, it has its uses for the root break. So kind of sad to see that go. Berserker's Torment has been removed. That's the Recklessness proc, I believe, from our Avatar, isn't it? No, that's Warlord's Torment. That must be the Fury version, I think. And then Blade Master's Torment is the Sweeping Strikes proc off of that, so obviously these are gone with Avatar. Challenger's Might, these are the passives tied to Spear, I believe, and Immovable Object, another passive. Piercing Challenge, I'm just going to go through these. Seismic Reverberation, so no more extra cleave damage. Thunderous Roar and its passives have been removed, so yeah, this is what they were talking about ability bloat. So we're losing 2 major cooldowns between Avatar and Thunderous Roar. I really hope that our AoE is supplemented in, our clash tree, that just, they make Blade Storm do a ton more damage, because this is a pretty big chunk of AoE damage that we're losing, if that's not propped up somewhere else. Titan's Torment, Unstoppable Force, Uproar, and Warlord's Torment, all the passives on the end of the tree there. So a quick peek at that, you can see the capstones. The only thing that remains really is Champion Spear, and we've just got passives on the bottom of the tree now for the warrior class tree. So maybe we'll grab Spear just for the utility of it. I don't know. The damage, it's just going to be a tuning number there. All right, moving down to Arms. Developer's notes. Much of Arms damage is from aligning damage increase and high damage cooldowns together, yeah. And the loss of damage from not doing this correctly every time can be very high. Yes, in AoE, not so much in single target, but obviously cooldown stacking is strong. We're keeping focus on Colossus Smash as Arm's most important damage cooldown. and adding some new talents to customize it for different fights. We're also removing some of Arms' modifiers to the next use of an ability such as Martial Prowess, which is the overpower buff on Mortal Strike, to make it less complex to determine the best rotational ability to use. Finally, we're improving Sweeping Strikes to keep Arms solidly in place as a champion of 2-target cleave damage. So, removing modifiers, I think, is probably a good thing overall, because Arms gets really messy because there's so many damage buffs all the time that you're spinning plates, and just taking a few of those away I'm fine with. Hopefully they don't go too far. But yeah, just that, for example, overpower buffing Mortal Strike, getting rid of that, that's fine. It makes me wonder where overpower is going to fit in the rotation at that point, though, because it just feels like slam. We'll have to wait and see. Apex talents will be available for testing in a future build. So unfortunately, I'm going to head this one off. We can't look at the new Apex talents, and the new hero talents are not yet implemented in the alpha either. So we can't look at any of the new changes for Slayer or Colossus in that regard. But we can look at all the other class changes. New talent, Initiative. Charge causes your auto attacks to generate 50% more rage for 5 seconds. This, depending on how it's tuned, could be really good, but it'll also add some complexity back to the spec that you might do, like charge cycling again, where you'd heroic leap out and, charge back in for extra rage. It depends on how good our rage economy is going into Midnight. Like right now in the War Within, rage is kind of a non-issue for Arms at the moment, so this doesn't seem necessary. We'll see. New talent, Brute Force. If Slam does not trigger Tactician, the critical strike chance of your next Slam is increased by 100%. That's pretty nice. Just a nice passive bonus that makes Slam feel not so bad to press, because Slam is like, you don't ever want to press it unless you have nothing else to do. So that makes it not feel so bad. New talent, Efficiency. Rage spent on Slam counts as double for Tactician. So this is interesting because obviously Tactician is what's resetting Overpower, but if Overpower no longer buffs Mortal Strike, like where does it fit in, comparative to Slam? So that's just going to be a tuning thing, I imagine. New talent, Just Warming Up. Colossus Smash generates 15 rage. Okay, that's fine. Once again, just depends on a rage economy. Broad Strokes. Colossus Smash grants 6 charges of Sweeping Strikes. So they kind of baked in the old Warlord's Torment, or not Warlord's Torment, Blade Master's Torment from the class tree into our Colossus Smash windows now with this 6 charges of Sweeping Strikes. So this charge thing, we'll get to it in a little bit, but they changed the way that Sweeping Strikes works. But yeah, we're getting that. New talent, Powerful Momentum. Damage dealt to nearby targets by Sweeping Strikes is increased by 25%. So I can say this appears that, as it is right now, your secondary target is getting hit for 75% damage on live. If you take this talent, it'll now be a 100%, so you're doing full damage to both targets. That's nice. New talent, Press the Advantage. Colossus Smash causes your next 3 Mortal Strikes to guaranteed trigger Tactician. So once again, something buffing Tactician. Crushing Combo, Colossus Smash reduces the cooldown of Cleave by 33% for 6 seconds. So that's going to, once again, that's kind of, they split up that talent, Blade Master's Torment, into 2 separate talents instead of just baking them together like they probably should have, like it was here. But it just means that you can get in more cleaves during that window. So, it's probably going to be pretty good with Merciless Bone Grinder as well. Master Tactician. When Overpower has its cooldown reset by Tactician, your abilities deal 10% additional damage for 4 seconds. So here is that new modifier that makes Overpower, once again, be very important to hit all the time on resets, because 10% additional damage, it's a small window, but 10% is huge. So yeah, that would explain all the passives that make guaranteed Tactician procs. Maybe you would weave with something like this too. So your next 3 Mortal Strikes, okay, so it's next 3 Mortal Strikes guaranteed. So you wouldn't even need to weave this. You would just, hit it on cooldown, but you would get this window 3 times in a row, guaranteed, which is nice. New talent, Deep Wounds. So our mastery has changed. Deep Wounds is no longer our mastery. Execute inflicts deep wounds on the target, causing high damage over 6 seconds. So it's another bleed. This is more like classic Deep Wounds that was procced off of crits, but this is now just Execute does it all the time. And new talent, Soften Them Up. Slam increases the damage of your next Mortal Strike by 10%, stacking up to 3 times. So basically they took away martial prowess from Overpower and gave it to Slam. I don't know how I feel about this. Like, they're getting rid of all the passive buffs, or what they claim to do, and then they add it right back in on, a different spell. So yeah, it makes Slam feel better to press and changes up the priority, but you're still stacking a bunch of modifiers. This is 3 stacks on that, plus this 10% window up here, and you have Colossus Smash, well, that hasn't changed, but it's just kind of an odd choice that they're just jostling around the buffs, but they're still there. New talent, Mortal Wounds. You inflict deep wounds on targets you critically strike with Mortal Strike or Cleave. So this is, like I said earlier, a little bit baking in the classic version of Deep Wounds, except it's based on crits. So Critical Strike is once again going to be very important for arms, as you might imagine. It's Cleave too, though, which is nice, so I like that. New talent, Fatality. So, not really a new talent, they just changed it. Mortal Strike has a high chance to apply a fatal mark to your target, stacking up to 5 times. Your next execute on a target with fatal mark causes the fatal mark to deal additional physical damage per stack. This is a fantastic change, in my opinion. It no longer stacks infinitely, it just goes up to 5, so it's much easier to tune, and also your next execute will just proc that fatal mark. So this means that sudden death procs will consume this. So the chances of it getting up to 5 are probably pretty slim, but maybe it'll get there. It says high chance. But it can also proc below the 35% threshold. So this doesn't lose any value during execute phase itself. You're just constantly going to get this buff. I like this change. Mastery, this is our mastery change. Master of Arms has been redesigned. While wielding two-handed weapon, you deal mastery % additional damage. So it's a good change, but it's boring. Not gonna lie about that. It's no longer tied to our bleeds, so we don't have to have deep wounds on the target to get our % damage increase, so that's overall a buff. But it's just literally you do more damage %-wise, so it's kind of boring, but it is a good change. Sweeping Strikes has been redesigned. Your next 12 damaging single-target abilities within 30 seconds hit 1 additional target within 8 yards for 75% damage, 30-second cooldown. So, yeah, this is like the classic design where it's charge-based. I want to go back up to the top here because I want to reiterate this. Finally, we're improving Sweeping Strikes. Improving. I'm fine with this change, but this is not improving because a 30-second cooldown for 12 swings, like the way it is currently on live with enough haste, you can get in way more than 12 abilities during this window. So I don't know in what world how that's an improvement, because the passive talents that you need to augment this to like buff it to 100%, you're having to burn a talent point for it. So it's kind of a net neutral, I guess. We'll see. Or maybe our haste is just going to be really low, so you actually spend all 12 within that window. That would kind of suck. We'll see. Improved Sweeping Strikes has been redesigned. It affects 6 additional damaging, so it'll stack this up to 18. Once again, you have to, burn a talent point for that, so it's okay, I guess. It seems like a bit of a nerf to me, though. Blunt Instruments has been redesigned. Colossus Smash is damage bonus is increased by 20%, but its duration is reduced by 20%. So, little sneak peek on that. Colossus Smash is still the same 10-second, 30% damage, and then Blunt Instruments reducing that, but buffing the damage bonus, so it's going to be 8 seconds at 36%. Doesn't feel as good. Definitely gimping that window, and the damage bonus isn't great, 6% off of it. We'll have to wait and see how balance turns out on that. I imagine you're still going to want to take that over the other one that extends the duration and just have an 8-second window at that point. Collateral Damage has been redesigned. When an ability used during Sweeping Strikes damages a second target, your next Cleave or Whirlwind deals 25% increased damage, stacking up to 3 times. I like this. It doesn't make it so punishing that you have to spam, like 20 abilities during Sweeping Strikes to get the maximum benefit. This is just a 75% damage boost on Cleave or Whirlwind. It's nice. It simplifies it, and it doesn't make it so punishing when you mess it up. Fueled by Violence now heals for bleed damage from Rend and Deep Wounds, so that's a nice passive little change that it's affecting Rend now as well. I suppose it makes sense because Deep Wounds is no longer technically permanent on the target since it's based on execute damage and Mortal Strike crits if you take the talent. Fervor of Battle now requires 3 targets to trigger Slam, and Slam's damage is increased by 50%. So, bit of a nerf here since it requires 3 targets instead of 2 between Cleave and Whirlwind. However, if you can still Sweeping Strikes the actual proc of the Slam, this is nice that it's buffed by 50%. Once again, makes Slam feel a bit better to hit in that window anyway. Tactician now has a 2% chance per rage spent to reset the cooldown of Overpower, was 1%. So basically they just got rid of the extra talents that, bumped this chance up by 1%. This is good. It was kind of a nothing talent anyway. It didn't need to be there. Colossus Smash now affects all enemies within 10 yards and functions as Warbreaker did. So this is a good thing, and it's an interesting change because I've never liked Warbreaker. I thought it was too much of a pigeonhole of our burst AoE damage between it. I would much rather Warbreaker have just went away and they buffed Bladestorm as our AoE cooldown. But they kind of took a different direction where now Colossus Smash is no longer single target at all. It's just Warbreaker all the time. So it's no longer, you have to pick. It's no longer a choice. So overall a decent change, just baking them together. So you don't have to think about it anymore. You just do your window with Warbreaker now. Sharpened Blade is now a 2-point talent. Each point grants 5% additional critical strike damage to Mortal Strike, Cleave, and Execute. I believe that's a buff from the original version. No, it's not. It's just 2 points now instead of 1, so actually a bit of a nerf on that. Excuse me. Strength of Arms is now a 2-point talent. Each point grants 5% damage, critical strike chance, and critical strike damage to Overpower and Slam. So, interesting that it's buffing Slam now as well, and not just Overpower. Executioner's Precision now buffs the warrior's next Mortal Strike rather than applying a debuff. Love this. I've always hated that it was a debuff on the target and not a buff for yourself. So you can get your 2, Executioner's stacks on you, and then you can turn and tab target that Mortal Strike on anything you want and get that buff. So great change. Bloodletting now increases the duration of Rend and Deep Wounds by 33%, and Mortal Strike applies Rend if it's below 35%, and the warrior knows Rend or has the Blood and Thunder talent. So it's no longer a flat 6 seconds, it's just a percent thing now, so, it's basically the same. Critical Thinking now increases Execute critical strike chance by 5% and refunds 10% of the rage spent on Execute per point. I believe that's a buff, because Critical Thinking, it was only 2% critical strike chance and 20% refund, so it's going to be 10% now on Execute. So Execute crits, which is going to proc much more Deep Wounds, since Deep Wounds isn't reliant on Execute crits, just MS. Still, though, a nice Execute buff. Bladestorm now extends the duration of Colossus Smash on targets the first time it deals damage to them. This is fantastic. So that 10-second window, or an 8-second window if you got it talented, should bump up to roughly, 16 seconds or 14 seconds. Because it's based on first time it deals. I read this somewhere that it extended it to the duration of Bladestorm. So I wonder if Bladestorm, since its default channel time is 6 seconds, but it's impacted by haste. So if you have a ton of haste, is this technically a nerf? Because it would only last for 4 seconds instead of the full 6 seconds of the window. I guess it wouldn't really matter because you're channeling Bladestorm the whole time anyway. But it's a nice change. So you could either throw this at the beginning of your burst window and just bump out the end, or you could tack this at the very last second and extend that window even further. Since it's AoE, you might want to do that, because you would have Rend and Deep Wounds, hopefully, on all those targets anyway to get that extra bleed damage. But it's a nice thing. Ignore Pain cooldown reduced to 6 seconds and Absorb amount increased by 100%. So that sounds fantastic, except for when you look at the new tree. It is now a choice node between Ignore Pain and Die by the Sword. That just seems awful to me. You don't use Ignore Pain all that often in PvE content unless you're pushing like really high keys or very specific situations. But it being a choice between it and Die by the Sword seems really bad. Unless the absorption is just absolutely massive, I don't see where you would ever take it over Die by the Sword. Parry is just too good. But maybe. It's alpha, things can change still. Coming back here, Warbreaker has been removed and it's been baked into CS. Yep. Talent tree layout has been updated and everything is moved. Following talents have been removed. Anger management, since that's now in the class tree. In for the Kill is gone, so that, that kind of sucks. I like the additional haste window during our burst. That always felt nice. That being said, you can see down here, Testamite is gone, and, good riddance as far as I'm concerned. I never liked Testamite. But both modifiers are gone. Juggernaut is gone. This is huge. So no longer will you have to play the game around a weak aura, for Slayer at least. That's great. Juggernaut is fun in practice, but the way it worked, it always should have stacked less, and the duration should have been 3 times as long, in my opinion. So it wasn't so punishing to lose those stacks or not get them up early. But the fact they just went, they just didn't like the talent and got rid of it, that's fine too. Martial Prowess is gone. That's another passive, I believe. Ravager is gone, so it's just Bladestorm now for arms. I'm fine with that. I've always preferred Bladestorm, but this is also going to be interesting that how is this going to impact Colossus's playstyle, especially in AoE. You're not going to have that Ravager spinning to get those stacks going really fast. Rend has been moved to the class tree, that's fine. Skull Splitter's gone, so some of that ability bloat getting taken away. Good riddance, I don't like Skull Splitter. I'm more sad about losing the big cooldowns like Avatar and Roar. Stormwall was the passive parry heal, it's gone. Testamite's gone, and Warbreaker's gone. So yeah, that wraps up all the arms changes on here, for patch notes anyway. I'm sure this video is going on long enough. We're just going to quickly look at the talents very quickly, otherwise this video is going to be way too long. Just a few things I noticed I wanted to point out. Thunderclap now reduces the target's movement speed by 40% rather than 20%, so nice slow baked into it. And Crackling Thunder bumps that up an additional 20%. So 60% slow on Thunderclap, and you're probably going to have this all the time. That's awesome. Just even passive utility, just slowing everything you're hitting with that. Love that change. Other than that, we've got, the change I mentioned to Rend being an AoE attack now. That's pretty cool. Retaliation and Sidearm. I don't know why they insist on Sidearm staying. That's kind of boring. Here's the new Battlefield Commander talent. That seems like an auto pick to me. We got Spear down here. They moved Wrecking Throw and Shattering Throw. Last Stand's at the very bottom, so we might not be able to take this in like raid environments all the time. It just depends on how many talent points you got to play with. Anger Management, that's going to be an auto pick. Crushing Force, the specializations. They moved up all the passive talents here, so maybe we'll still take them all. It's hard to say. Concussive Blows being in the middle here, I kind of like that. So that 5% damage increase, no longer being on a choice node, just being right here, on these ramps, means that we're going to be much more likely to have this, which I like. So that extra damage on kicking something is nice. Other than that, nothing else has really been like a major change that I can see off that. But looking at the arms tree, real quick, the hero talents, they've changed slightly, but nothing really to talk about at the moment until the new talents come out. But the arms tree looks way different, as you can see. Sudden Death is an auto pick now, no longer a choice, so much more emphasis on execute, especially with our but Deep Wounds being only procced off execute and MS cleave crits. We've got, there's that initiative talent. Who knows, we'll take that. It might be like Blood Surge where it won't really matter. Warbreaker or Colossus Smash now. They changed the icon for that. We get the charges of Sweeping Strikes. Once again, improved Sweeping Strikes, and the Powerful Momentum are a choice node there. I still don't know how I feel about that. It seems like a nerf to me having it be charge-based. Cleave is still a talent, so yeah, you're probably going to take that all the time in AoE still. Press the Advantage. Let's see, those are the Tactician things, or reducing the cooldown of Cleave, so, AoE or single target talents. Here's some of the passive things that, like, change Tactician and Slam's priority that buff, the damage of everything. Like this 10% talent there. So it's going to be interesting to see how the rotation shakes out in that regard. We got Mortal Wounds down here. I like this. We'll have to wait and see with the Apex talents whether or not we grab this all the time. Merciless Bone Grinder's back, and Fatality on the end here. Interestingly, they got rid of Culling Cyclone and Unhinged, which I get. I'm kind of sad to see Unhinged go, though, because it made Bladestorm feel so much better to press in single target right now. It just kind of sucks. I really, really hope that since we lost Avatar and Roar, Bladestorm's tuning is like 3 times as much as it is right now. This should feel good to press all the time, not in just AoE. So really cross my fingers on that. And yeah, that's pretty much all I want to talk about today. Before the new changes come in for Apex talents and the hero talent changes, I'll probably do an update on that in the near future whenever those get added. But yeah, what are you guys' thoughts? Leave them down below. If you made it this far, thanks for letting me ramble for a while about Warrior stuff. I just like talking about it. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.